from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Sophia Evans's wedding dress looked like it had been stitched with silence, flawless, sparkling, yet heavy, not because of the fabric, but because of what it symbolized. This wasn't a wedding, it was a contract, sealed with a golden ring, and yet she smiled for the cameras like someone signing a ceasefire across the altar. James Harper held his usual posture. Cold, perfect, calculated. The most feared CEO in the global real estate industry wasn't there for love. They both knew exactly what they were doing. The Evans and Harper families had sealed their fate years earlier over fancy dinners, land deals, and stiff smiles for the social columns. The ceremony was nothing more than a showcase of the alliance between two empires. What came after? A shared penthouse, a coordinated public schedule, and an agreement. No intimacy, no interference in each other's lives, just enough to keep up appearances. In the first few months, Sophia kept herself busy. She worked overtime, won a lawsuit against a multinational corporation, received legal recognition awards. She made her name shine even brighter. More than anything, she wanted to prove to herself that she didn't need him to be someone. James, meanwhile, locked away in his glass tower, was surrounded by spreadsheets, meetings, and targets. His world was numeric, controlled, untouchable. To him, Sophia was a fixed variable, predictable, and for that reason alone, comfortable. But there was something neither of them ever said out loud. The other's presence stirred something, not hostility, but something quieter, a silent tension. Glances that lingered just a bit too long, absences that felt heavier than they should. At family dinners, they laughed in sync, just like they were taught. When they crossed paths in the hallway, they exchanged polite greetings. But some nights, the sound of Sophia's heels clicking on the marble floor threw James off completely, and some afternoons, she caught herself wondering what he'd think if he saw her with her hair tied up, no makeup, just her. They never slept together, not even in the most literal sense. Separate bedrooms, separate routines, separate lives. A civil partnership, a perfect facade, a hollow existence as polished as the floor beneath them. One day, Sophia came home from an exhausting court hearing, kicked off her shoes, and poured herself a glass of wine in the kitchen. James had just returned from a business trip and watched her from a distance. She stood with her back to him, shoulders relaxed, but there was a deep weariness in her posture. He said nothing, just walked past her and went upstairs. Sophia stayed where she was, staring at her reflection in the window, almost as if she were waiting for a reaction that never came. What they had was safe, predictable, and in a way, comfortable. But it was also deeply lonely. Their parents praised the couple's maturity. The media called it a model union between two powerhouses, but no one saw what really happened behind closed doors. The absence of touch, the silence at breakfast, the distance at bedtime, and yet something held them together, a kind of quiet respect. James never crossed Sophia's boundaries. Sophia never exposed James. They coexisted in peace, but also in pause. One evening, while flipping through a book she couldn't finish, Sophia heard footsteps outside the library. James entered without knocking, rare for him. He had a box of documents to review, but paused when he saw her there, glasses on, wrapped in a blanket. She looked at him a second longer than she needed to. He cleared his throat, as if trying to justify his presence, but said nothing. He sat in a chair across the room and started reading, and there they stayed, two intimate strangers, breathing in the same space, sharing the same silence. That night, Sophia had a strange dream. She and James were lying on the grass in an open field, laughing at something she couldn't remember when she woke up, but she remembered the feeling clearly. For the first time, she felt light. The next day, however, everything went on as usual, until the charity gala invitation arrived. It was a traditional Harper family event. As always, they were expected to attend together. Photos, speeches, dancing, then each would return to their own world. Or at least that was the plan. But that night had something else in mind. The sky was torn by thick clouds, and the storm arrived without warning, as if to say, not everything can be planned. After the charity gala, Sophia was getting ready to drive back on her own when she was told the main road had been closed. Fallen trees, landslide risk. James, just as frustrated, received the same news. A security guard suggested they spend the night at the Harper's country house nearby. The driver hesitated, But they both knew insisting was pointless. The storm was more stubborn than either of them, and so, for the first time in months, they rode in the same car, side by side in the back seat, in silence. Only the sound of heavy rain filled the space between them. The country house was large but modest. Nothing like the concrete and glass apartment they shared in the city. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, the curtains swayed with the wind, and the soft scent of eucalyptus drifted from the old wood stove, as if the place still held memories they had never made. There were no staff, no formalities, just the two of them, and silence again. But this silence felt different. Not uncomfortable, dense, alive. Shortly after midnight, the generator failed. The lights went out all at once, plunging the house into darkness. Sophia held her breath instinctively. James, across the room, lit a candle. The glow cast over his face made him look softer, almost human. She nodded in thanks and sat on the couch, pulling a blanket over her legs. He walked to the wine cellar and brought back 2 glasses, handed one to her. Their fingers touched for a moment, just a second, but it sparked something they'd both been pretending not to feel. "We're stuck here," he said with a hint of dry humor. "Stuck. Or forced to face what we've been avoiding every day?" Sophia replied, looking straight at him. The words hung in the air like smoke. James sat down on the other end of the couch, keeping a respectful distance. The wine loosened their shoulders. But it was the silence that spoke the loudest. Their eyes met more often, held longer, no rush. "Didn't picture you as someone who liked storms," she said after thunder rattled the window. "I don't. But maybe I'm starting to think they reveal more than they hide." It was the first thing he'd ever said that didn't sound rehearsed. Sophia looked at him, surprised, and something in her chest gave way. A wall, a lock, a fear. He looked back, this time longer, as if asking for something without words. Sophia noticed, and instead of backing away, she stayed. James moved closer, slowly, almost shyly. He reached out but didn't touch. He waited, and for the first time since the wedding, she chose not to resist. The kiss wasn't fiery. It was slow, intense, as if each movement asked for permission. His hands rested gently on her waist, their eyes closed with care. It felt like they both knew they were crossing a line, and once they did, nothing would be the same. The blanket slipped to the floor, the candles flickered, and the two bodies that had only coexisted until then now searched for each other, like trying to remember something long forgotten. Sophia felt his skin shiver under her touch. James lost the control he always carried, and for once, let himself be led. She guided. He followed. Time faded. She fell asleep right there, wrapped in his arms, as if it were the safest place in the world. For the first time, there was no distance between them, just warmth, breathing, presence. Hours later, still in the middle of the night, she woke up. Without saying a word, she pressed her forehead against his chest, listening for his heartbeat. He responded with a soft kiss on her hair. Their bodies came together again, slowly, quietly. This time was different, softer, almost reverent, as if both were trying to stretch that moment all the way to sunrise, as if the silence between them had found a new shape, not as emptiness, but as a space where love might, just maybe, begin. When Sophia awoke in the morning, blue light filled the room. The other side of the bed was cold, empty. James was gone. She sat up slowly, pulling the sheet to her chest. There were traces of him on the pillow, but no explanation, no note, not a word. His absence hurt more than she wanted to admit. She got dressed calmly, ran her fingers through her hair, and walked downstairs with a strange feeling in her chest. A different kind of silence now, not the one from before, but the kind that says, "What now?" James was on the porch, already on the phone, talking about investors and shareholders, as if nothing had happened. When she appeared, he simply nodded and went on with his call. She didn't say anything, and that morning, the silence between them returned to how it had always been. But something had already changed. The days that followed were strangely normal, and that's exactly what made them hurt. Sophia returned to the apartment like someone coming back from a trip they didn't want to end. In the panoramic elevator, catching her reflection in the mirror, she noticed something in her eyes, a dim light, an unanswered question. James stepped in right after, phone glued to his ear, talking about mergers and acquisitions, as if the previous night had never happened, as if they hadn't touched each other like two people finding shelter in the middle of a storm. "Good evening," she said as they stepped out of the elevator. He nodded, distracted. "Good evening." That was it. No, Can we talk later? No lingering glance. Just the same routine filling every crack with cruel precision. That night, Sophia didn't sleep in the guest room, and she didn't go to her own either. She sat on the living room sofa for hours, hugging her knees, trying to understand why it hurt so much. After all, the deal had always been clear. No promises, no strings attached, but there were memories. And that was the part that stung the most. Having lived something that to him seemed nothing more than a slip, a lapse, a brief break in protocol that could be easily forgotten. At breakfast the next day, he sat at the table with his laptop open, reading reports. Sophia made herself some tea, sat across from him, and watched. James never looked up, didn't mention the night at the country house, didn't even ask if she'd slept well. The indifference hurt more than an outright rejection because it carried a silent denial, a quiet eraser of everything they'd felt, or what she thought they had. She wanted to scream, to ask, "Did that night mean anything to you?" But her pride was stronger. She simply crossed her legs, sipped her tea, and with a polite smile asked, "Any family dinners this week?" "I think there's one on Friday. Check with my assistant," he replied, eyes still on the screen. The words cut like a blade, cold, sharp, and delivered with the ease of someone signing another contract. That afternoon, she went back to work as if wearing invisible armor. She won a complex case, received praise from colleagues, and ended the day with a glass of champagne in hand, alone in her office, staring out the window. But she couldn't feel proud, only empty. At home, the days followed the same distant choreography. James left early, came home late, and slept in silence. Sophia began avoiding the common areas. If he was in the kitchen, she went to the bedroom. If he was in the living room, she chose the library. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, the envelope arrived. On the dining table sat a discreet folder, no logo, with her name handwritten on the front. Sophia opened it slowly. Inside, printed pages, direct phrasing, short clauses, blank signature lines. It was a formal request for divorce. For a moment, the world tilted. The ground, already far from stable, turned to liquid. She read each paragraph like someone reading a verdict for a trial that hadn't even been announced. There was no note, no explanation, just the papers. She walked to James's room with the folder in hand. He had his back turned, removing his suit jacket. When he saw her standing at the door, he hesitated. "Is this serious?" she asked, raising the envelope. He looked at her with a guarded expression. "I thought this would be easier. After the confusion the other night." "Confusion? We got carried away, that's all. There's no need to make things complicated." His words were so cold they hardly seemed to come from him, or maybe they did, and just revealed a side of him she had preferred not to see. Sophia took a deep breath. Her eyes burned, but she held herself together. "You really think that's all it was?" James hesitated, ran a hand through his hair, avoided her gaze. "I thought that's what you wanted too." "No, it wasn't." And she left the room with the papers still in hand. That night, she didn't cry, didn't yell, just lay there awake, staring at the ceiling. The only question echoing in her mind was, how can something so real be erased so easily? The following days were filled with complete silence. She didn't bring it up, neither did he. They simply carried on like ghosts, sharing the same space. One night, coming home to find he wasn't there, she took the opportunity to pack some things and stay at her mother's for a while. She needed air, space, distance, but even in another house, his silence followed her. No messages, no questions, just a polite disappearance, like he had crossed her name off a list. The next week, she returned to the office, back to the life she knew, and decided to move on, even if she didn't know how. Even with that emptiness that refused to leave, it was a typical morning at Evans & Associates. The hallways buzzed with hurried footsteps, folders changing hands, and phone calls echoing through glass-walled offices. Sophia sat tucked behind her desk, surrounded by complex cases and half-empty coffee cups. Work had become her best shield against feelings she didn't want to face. She had left the divorce papers tucked away in the back of a drawer, out of sight, where she wouldn't have to look at the blank signature line, but the real weight wasn't on paper. It was in her chest, a constant reminder that something had started to fall apart. When the receptionist knocked, Sophia barely looked up. "Who is it?" she asked, still typing. "The 10 o'clock a.m. client." He didn't give his name over the phone, just said it was personal, urgent. She frowned, sighed, and stood. When she opened the door, her heart faltered. James was standing there, dark suit, composed expression, as if there were no history between them, as if he were just another client waiting for legal advice. For a split second, Sophia's eyes wavered. The air felt too thick, but she quickly pulled herself together with the grace of someone who had learned how to build emotional armor. "Mr. Harper," she said, stepping aside. "Come in." He walked in silently, glancing around the room with a kind of disguised familiarity. It felt strange seeing him there, in a space that was entirely hers, a place he had never entered before. She motioned for him to sit. He did. They sat across from each other, separated by a desk and by everything left unsaid. "How can I help you?" she asked, her tone cold professional. James hesitated, swallowed hard, and for a moment the mask almost slipped. But he gathered himself. "I need assistance with a property negotiation. I prefer to speak with you directly." She raised an eyebrow, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. "Of course, we're excellent at negotiations." He took the jab silently. There was no irony in his gaze, just a deep exhaustion, a quiet longing he didn't dare name. Sophia grabbed a notepad and began writing, pretending it was just another case. But every word he spoke carried unspoken meaning. Every pause, every sigh, was a whole conversation being choked back. "The property is in Aspen. I'm considering selling it," he said, looking directly at her. "It's a country house. You might remember it." Her chest tightened. She remembered every corner, every flickering candle, every silent touch. The entire night came rushing back like a wave of warmth in the cold formality of the moment. "There's nothing that needs remembering," she replied flatly, not lifting her eyes. James leaned slightly forward in his chair. "I know I messed up." She stopped him with a raised hand, still focused on the paper. "That's legally irrelevant." He fell silent. Not because he agreed, but because he didn't know how to break through her armor. For the first time, he looked small in front of her. The consultation continued for a few more minutes. Sophia asked questions. He answered, all business, all clean, all suffocating. But some things don't fit in legal protocols, like the way their eyes darted away too quickly, like the moment his fingers brushed the edge of the desk, as if searching for an invisible bridge to hers. When it ended, she closed the notepad, stood, and extended her hand. "Good luck with the sale, Mr. Harper." He stood as well, but didn't touch her. "Sophia." She looked up. "Steady, please. This is my workplace." James took a deep breath. His eyes were pleading. For what she wasn't sure, maybe an explanation, maybe a second chance, but she simply opened the door in silence. He left without another word, and she closed the door with a trembling hand. Alone in the office, Sophia leaned against the wood and slowly slid to the floor. The tears didn't come, but the emptiness did. A familiar emptiness. Only now, it was louder. Filled with the weight of what could have been, but never was. Just outside, James paused, pressed his forehead against the cold hallway wall, and then walked away. His steps heavy with the weight of his own regret. The days began to feel disconnected, as if Sophia were living in third person. She woke up, took a shower, went to the office, handled complex cases, smiled at her colleagues, but inside, everything felt suspended, like something was out of place. By late afternoon, as the office lights turned off one by one, she would still be there, seated at her desk, staring at spreadsheets she once mastered with ease. But her mind kept drifting, and more than that, her body felt different. The fatigue was heavier, almost physical. Morning nausea became frequent, first occasional, then unavoidable. The smell of coffee, once comforting, now made her stomach turn. Hunger came in strange waves, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes non-existent, and there was a constant feeling that something inside her had changed, something alive. On a Saturday, alone at home, she decided to organize the bathroom shelves and stumbled upon a pregnancy test tucked among first aid supplies. It was as if the box stared back at her. She stood there for several seconds, frozen, holding the unopened package, heart pounding. Impossible, she thought. But the memory of that night at the country house wouldn't leave her, nor would James's silence after, nor the absence of any protection on the night their bodies spoke louder than their words. She left the test on the bathroom sink and walked out, made tea, wandered through the living room, opened and closed the window 4 times. The test seemed to call her back, but she resisted for 2 more days. Only when the delay became obvious and the signs undeniable did she gather the courage. She went into the bathroom, closed the door, sat down, and followed the instructions with trembling hands. 3 minutes, an eternity. She held her breath the whole time, staring at the floor, the wall, her fingernails, until she couldn't avoid it anymore. 2 lines. Clear, unmistakable, real. Sophia leaned against the cold, tiled wall, her breathing shallow, her mind spinning. The news hit her like a whisper and a scream all at once. She was pregnant. The silence in the house grew louder. She didn't cry, didn't smile, just sat there. Still. Feeling her heart race faster than normal, or maybe it was 2 hearts now. The memories of that night came rushing back like a silent film behind her eyes. His touch, the look before the kiss, the way he held her after, and then nothing. She didn't consider telling him right away. She knew James would handle the news like he handled everything, with calculations, planning, and a solution proposal. But what she carried now wasn't a contract clause. It was a human being. It was life. She spent the following week avoiding her own thoughts. She kept busy with everything. Schedules, meetings, tasks, checklists. But her body wouldn't let her forget. The nausea, the exhaustion, the perfume she used to love that now made her sick. The next Monday, she booked an ultrasound. Alone. She needed to be sure before any conversation. She wanted to see, to hear, to feel. The doctor smiled warmly as she turned on the machine. Sophia, lying down, eyes on the ceiling, expected anything except the sound that suddenly filled the room. A fast, strong, living thump. Thump, the baby's heartbeat. That was the moment a single tear fell. Not from fear, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming certainty she wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time in a long time, that felt good. At the end of the appointment, the doctor handed her a small printed image, a blurry shape to anyone else, but to Sophia, it was everything. She left the clinic with the picture tucked inside her planner, walked through the city without direction, as if the world needed to pause for a moment. When she sat on a bench next to a popcorn vendor, she made a decision. She wouldn't run from this. She would face it all, like she always had. That night, she wrote a single sentence in her journal. I didn't ask for this. I didn't plan it. But I accept it. Days later, she called James, set up a time, asked him to come to her office again, told him it was urgent. He showed up at the agreed hour, punctual as always, wearing a dark suit, a puzzled look on his face, but his eyes gave away something else, a hidden fear. Sophia received him standing by the window. Thanks for coming, she said. Straight to the point. He nodded. Is something wrong? She walked to her desk, reached into her bag, and pulled out the ultrasound photo. She handed it to him without saying a word. James looked at it, and within seconds, he understood. His body stiffened, his lips parted as if to say something, but nothing came out. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice steady, and before you say anything, let me be clear. I'm not asking for your opinion or your presence. I just thought you should know. James remained silent, holding the image like it was made of glass. I'm going through with this, with or without you, and before you try to talk me out of it, understand this is not negotiable. She waited, but he didn't move. Only after several long seconds did James lift his gaze, and for the first time since that night, there was something in his eyes she didn't recognize. It wasn't control or coldness. It was a desperate fear of losing everything again. The silence that followed the revelation wasn't the same as before. It wasn't the silence of indifference, of routine, or neglect. It was a dense silence, full of words yet to be spoken, of feelings both had carefully locked away until now. James held the ultrasound photo like it might vanish if he let go. His hand trembled, his eyes fixed on the paper. When he finally looked up again, he was vulnerable. For the first time in a very long time. I don't know what to say, he murmured. Sophia crossed her arms, steady. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. You know me, Sophia. You know that I don't handle things well when they're out of my control. She let out a dry laugh. Oh, I know. That's exactly why I came ahead of time. Because this child isn't going to be a project or a spreadsheet. And if control is the only way you know how to love, then maybe we stop right here. James walked to the window, ran his hands through his hair. He looked smaller, somehow, like the suit no longer fit. His voice came low, almost cracked. I didn't know what to do after that night. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and like an idiot. I did what I always do. I ran. Sophia watched him from a distance, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit, not because of his presence, but because of his words, the effort, the attempt. I left you alone, he continued. When, for the first time, you weren't. She swallowed hard but said nothing. She waited. She wanted to hear it all. I thought if I acted like nothing had happened, it would just fade away. It would be just one night. A mistake. But it wasn't a mistake, Sophia. Not for me. She stepped closer, slowly, still keeping some distance. Then why did you send me those papers? Why did you treat me like I was just your assistant? James looked at her with raw honesty, the kind that hurts and heals at the same time. Because I was a coward. Because I thought that pushing you away would protect me. But the truth is, I've never felt closer to anyone than I did that night. And that terrified me more than any meeting with shareholders or court hearing ever could. She remained silent. His words struck too deeply. And at the same time, they started healing cracks. She didn't even know we're still open. James took a step forward. I don't want to run from this. Not from you. Not from what we had. And especially not from this child. He paused, took a breath. I want to be there, as a father. And if you'll allow me, as a man too. Sophia looked away. Pride still echoed loudly inside her, but something stronger was rising. The desire not to carry this alone. I don't know if I can trust you again. I know, and I'm not asking you to. Not yet. I just want a chance to try, to do it differently this time. She looked back at him, and for a moment, time stood still. Because there, in front of her, wasn't the CEO or the man behind her staged marriage. It was someone stripped of armor, ready to relearn everything. This won't be easy, she said. Nothing worth it ever is. Sophia sat down again. Her body tired but her soul just a little lighter. I'm moving forward with this pregnancy. With or without you. That hasn't changed. I know. And that's exactly why I want to be here. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. He moved closer. Slowly. No rush. Just like that candlelit night. He sat across from her, eyes meeting hers. I don't know what will become from here, but I want to be part of it. For real. With presence. With mistakes if needed. But with truth. She took a deep breath, and this time, the tears came. Silent. Warm. Freeing. James reached out but didn't touch. May I? Sophia hesitated, then slowly let their fingers meet in the middle of the table. It was a light touch, but firm. A quiet bridge between everything they had been and everything they might still become. In that single gesture was his confession, not spoken in words, but shown through presence, not wrapped in promises, but in something much stronger. Choice. And for the first time since she discovered the pregnancy, Sophia didn't feel like she was just carrying a new life inside her. She felt like she was finally beginning her own. From that day on, James began to show up, not with flowers or rehearsed speeches, but with presence, with care, with respectful silence. At the first doctor's appointment after the confession, he arrived 10 minutes early, sat in the waiting room with his hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. When Sophia walked out of the exam room and saw him there, surprised, he simply said, I thought maybe you'd like some company. She hesitated, then nodded, and they walked side by side. No touching, no conversation, but with something new lingering in the air. Intention. In the weeks that followed, small gestures started to appear, almost invisible. Sophia would come home to find fresh fruit on the counter, her favorites, sliced and packed, a note reminding her to take her vitamins stuck to the fridge, a bottle of water slipped into her work bag. Nothing grand, nothing intrusive, just signs that someone was paying attention. One evening, he showed up at her office with an envelope. She raised an eyebrow. What's this? The divorce papers, torn up. Personally, she took the envelope, opened it. The documents were indeed inside, neatly shredded. No words were exchanged after that. But she looked at him a few seconds longer before returning to her desk. James began to attend some of her appointments. Not all of them. He never insisted. He just said, I'll be there if you want me to be. And when she wanted, he was. No phone in hand, no interruptions. One afternoon, after an appointment, Sophia sat on the clinic steps to breathe. She was nauseated, tired, emotionally drained. He sat beside her and offered a mint. Gum works for my stomach. Might work for yours. She took it and chuckled softly. You've been pregnant before? No. But I Googled for 2 hours last night. She shook her head, unsure whether to laugh or cry. You're really trying, huh? I am. Even if I stumble. That evening, he dropped her off and left without trying to come inside. She stood at the window, watching him walk away, and she missed him, not his absence, his presence, which now started to matter. At work, Sophia began noticing subtle messages on her phone, not declarations, just simple reminders. Did you eat today? Don't forget tomorrow's appointment. We still need to choose a color for the baby's room. She pretended not to care but saved every single one. Slowly, the initial fear gave way to something even riskier. Hope. On a random Saturday, James showed up with a crib catalog. He sat on her living room floor, spreading the pages across the carpet. Any of these match the situation? Sophia, lying on the couch, laughed. You mean the baby's room? No, us. This mess we're trying to make sense of. She sat beside him and pointed to a simple light wood model. This one, nothing too fancy, no royalty. Just something calm. Perfect, he said, noting it like he was closing a deal. She gave him a sideways glance. You know you don't have to do all this, right? He looked up. I know, but I want to. And what came from that wasn't pressure. It was consistency. On a rainy Tuesday, she came home to find a dry coat hanging on the chair, warm tea on the table, and a pair of new socks folded beside a note. Noticed your feet were swelling. She didn't reply. But that night, alone, she cried. Not from sadness, but because she was finally allowing herself to feel. And it had been a long time since there was space for that. As the months passed, he started dropping her off at work. Nothing more. A quiet good morning, a brief glance, and then the car would leave. But in the back seat, there was always something new. A bag of snacks, a baby name book, a new pillow. They still didn't sleep together, still didn't touch. But the bond between them grew like silent roots beneath the ground. Then, one weekend, he showed up with an unusual proposal. Want to cook for you? I don't know much, but I learned a recipe yesterday. I promise it's not poisonous. She eyed him suspiciously. You know I'm picky. I do, but maybe I'll impress you. That night, the kitchen became a stage for laughter, clumsy moves, and flour everywhere. Sophia found herself laughing for real, for the first time in months. James burned the dough, forgot the salt, but served everything with the ceremony of a 5-star chef. 5 for taste, 10 for effort, she teased. He grinned. Better than what my therapist used to give me. You went to therapy? Tried. Quit after the second session. Why? She started talking too much about my childhood. Sophia laughed, shaking her head. And that night, as she watched him clear the table and wash the dishes, something inside her settled. Maybe he didn't know how to love the way she had dreamed, but he was trying like no one ever had. What once was noise became presence, and what once was absence became a silence filled with meaning. James started showing up in places that didn't require announcement. He'd sit quietly in the corner of the room while Sophia finished a work call, watched without interrupting, like someone admiring a landscape they had grown to respect. She, in turn, no longer minded. Over time, his presence became natural, like a warm cup of tea forgotten on the edge of the desk. Subtle but comforting. At the office, he'd watch her handle tough negotiations with confidence. His eyes followed her gestures with a mix of pride and regret. Sometimes she noticed, sometimes she pretended not to, but every time, she felt it, and it was impossible not to. One afternoon, exhausted, she fell asleep with her feet up on the desk. When she woke up, there was a blanket over her shoulders, and the air conditioner had been turned off. No one mentioned it, but the next night, when she opened her bag, she found a pair of wool socks, still with the tag, and a note clipped to the fabric. Making sure you're comfortable has become my new obsession. She smiled to herself in the elevator. At home, they began sharing small tasks without ceremony. It became normal to see them folding baby clothes together, side by side on the couch, saying nothing. Sometimes James would read the packaging labels with exaggerated seriousness. This blanket is hypoallergenic, according to the label in 3 languages. Sophia would laugh. You're taking this more seriously than your financial reports. Reports don't cry in the middle of the night or pee on you, thankfully. Between one fold and the next, their hands would brush unintentionally, and unlike before, neither pulled away. It was a touch without urgency, without desire, but full of tenderness, of presence, of history. One morning, James showed up with a bag and a simple request. I want to build the crib today. Today, before I lose my nerve. They spent the day together, surrounded by screws, loose pieces, and a poorly translated manual. They argued 3 times about which part fit where. He pretended to know what he was doing. She mocked his overconfidence. In the end, they laughed a lot, and the crib, still crooked, got built. "It's staying like that," he said. "It is. Our baby will sleep tilted, but with style." Sophia looked at the crib, then at him, and something inside her warmed. That night, after an improvised dinner and half a movie, she saw him grabbing his coat to leave, but he hesitated at the door. "Do you want to stay?" she asked casually. He looked at her, surprised. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Just stay, that's all." He dropped the coat over the chair and sat beside her on the couch. They stayed in silence for long minutes. No touch, no words, just two breaths slowly sinking. She rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't move, just let it happen. Later, when she went upstairs, she left the door slightly open, said nothing, but James understood. And that night, for the first time since the country house, she slept with him nearby, without fear, without pressure. In the days that followed, they remained like that, in silence. He left short notes. "Blood test today, or salt crackers are in the top cabinet." She answered with gestures. "An extra cup of tea at dinner." A pillow fluffed up on the couch when he dozed off reading about fatherhood. It was in that silence that they understood each other best. One day, while opening the bathroom cabinet, James found a bottle of his cologne placed discreetly between Sophia's creams. Next to it, a freshly cleared spot on the shelf. An unspoken invitation, a space reserved. The following week, without saying a word, he left a change of clothes there. They didn't talk about it. They didn't have to. On a rainy morning, Sophia came downstairs and found James on the living room rug, quietly reading a children's book out loud, testing intonations, practicing stories. She stood in the doorway, watching. And for the first time, she knew with absolute certainty she wasn't alone on this journey. More than that, she didn't want to be anymore. The night was silent, the kind where even clocks seemed to tick slower. Sophia woke with a strange cramp, nothing like what she'd felt before. It was as if something inside her had shifted. Raw, new pressure. Almost primal. She sat up in bed, hands on her rounded belly, trying to breathe deeply. The room was dark, and James had been sleeping in the guest room since she'd asked for more space during the final weeks of pregnancy. She hesitated to call him. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. The pain returned, stronger now and coming at regular intervals. Sophia knew it was time. She went to the bathroom, washed her face, changed clothes, and grabbed the hospital bag she had already prepared. When she walked downstairs, she found James in the kitchen, standing there, holding a mug of tea. "It's happening," was all she managed to say. He didn't ask, "Are you sure?" He didn't panic, didn't reach for his phone. He just looked into her eyes and nodded calmly. "I'll take you." In the car, the silence was filled with breath and anticipation. James drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting between the seats, ready to hold hers at any moment. When another strong contraction hit, Sophia clenched her eyes shut, her teeth, and his hand instinctively, he didn't let go. At the hospital, she was taken to triage. James stayed outside, filling out paperwork and answering questions like every detail mattered. When they finally let him into the delivery room, he wore a visitor badge around his neck and kept his eyes fixed on her, as if his only purpose there was to hold her up. "I'm here," he whispered, gripping her hand. "Are you staying until the end?" After 2, the pain intensified. The hours dragged on like time was sinking in quicksand. Sophia cried out, sweated, screamed, but never let go of his hand. James, used to controlling boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, was now completely powerless. For the first time, he couldn't control a thing, except for the love he was only beginning to understand. She gripped his fingers so tightly the knuckles turned red. He didn't complain, didn't flinch. "You're doing amazing," he said. Even when she said she couldn't take it anymore. "I can't do this. You can. You've overcome so much, Sophia. This is just one more step." The contractions grew fiercer. Her screams blended with tears, and between intervals, she whispered, "I'm scared. So am I. But I'm with you." And in that mix of panic and surrender, the baby finally arrived. A loud cry. Wet. Alive. Sophia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Neither did James. When they placed the baby on her chest, the world seemed to stop. The child's eyes shut, his breathing steadied, and Sophia, soaked in sweat, exhausted, shattered, and reborn, looked at James as if seeing him clearly for the first time. He was crying quietly, no fuss, "It's a boy," the nurse said. James rested his forehead against hers, still holding her hand. "Thank you for letting me see this," he whispered. "Thank you for staying." Hours later, in the recovery room, the baby slept in the clear bassinet beside the bed. Sophia rested with half-closed eyes. James sat in the armchair, watching them both. He stood quietly, walked over to the crib, and gently touched his son's tiny foot with one finger. Sophia opened her eyes slowly. "He looks like you," she said. James smiled. "I hope he gets his mother's heart." She didn't reply, just reached her hand out to him. He walked over, took it, and sat on the edge of the bed. "You were amazing," he said. "I just did what had to be done. I'm trying too." She looked at him, and for the first time saw a whole man, a man who was present, not perfect, but real. That night, no one got much sleep. Diapers, feedings, colic, but the chaos felt different. It was shared, human, real, and in the middle of it all, between the baby's cries and the exhaustion, James held his son and looked at Sophia. "You gave me more than a child." "What else?" "A new beginning." She smiled. And in that hospital room, no glamour, no grand promises, no perfect plans. Something was born that they had never known before. A family. The house wasn't the same anymore. Now, the dominant sound wasn't the echo of silence, but the scattered cries of a newborn. Midnight had taken on a new purpose. The rooms had found a new soul. And the days, new priorities. Nothing followed a set plan anymore. And for the first time, that felt right. Sophia, who used to measure her hours with surgical precision, now lost all sense of time between feedings, baths, and moments spent dozing off with the baby in her arms. James, used to scheduled meetings and quarterly projections, found himself learning the difference between daytime and nighttime diapers, and laughing at himself when he put one on backward. They still didn't officially share the same room, but they shared everything else. The tasks, the decisions, the sleepless nights, the fears, and without even noticing, growing affection. The baby, whom they had welcomed with awe and disbelief, quickly began to set the pace for both of them. James learned to prepare bottles like someone diffusing a time bomb. He got the measurements wrong the first few times, earned disapproving looks from Sophia, but kept at it. "You're getting good at this," she said one night as he calmed the baby with a lullaby. "Off-key but sweet. Think I'm becoming a multitasking man. You still need to learn how to rock the baby with one hand and answer emails with the other." "One day at a time," he replied with a tired smile. The days felt the same, yet each one was unique. Sophia began to see James differently, not with the old suspicion, but with curious eyes. He wasn't just the rigid executive she had met. Here was a man trying to learn how to be a father, a partner, maybe something more. When he made mistakes, he apologized. When he got it right, he didn't ask for praise. He just kept going, cleaned the house quietly, took the baby from her arms before she even asked, said, "Go rest. I've got him," even when he was exhausted himself. And it was in those small, consistent acts that love began to leave real marks. One morning, Sophia came downstairs and found James with the baby wrapped in a light blue blanket, sleeping in his arms while he sipped coffee with his free hand. "You got up with him at 3 o'clock, a.m., then again at 5. Now we're officially awake. Why didn't you wake me?" "Because you needed sleep. You do everything." She walked over and gently ran her fingers through his hair, a gesture that came without a filter, without a wall. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if that touch meant more than any words. Lunches became improvised, sometimes takeout, sometimes leftovers reheated in a rush, but they ate together as often as they could, with the baby nestled in a cushioned nest at the center of the table, because he was the center of their universe. One afternoon, while folding tiny clothes on the couch, Sophia said, "Never thought starting a family would involve this much fabric, and so much laughter at the weirdest hours, and so much patience with diapers or your partner." Both. They laughed and didn't need to say anything else. Time passed, both quickly and slowly. Weeks turned into months. And one day, watching James teach the baby how to hold a colorful toy, Sophia felt something bloom inside. It wasn't just admiration or affection. It was love. Calm, mature, deep. That night, as he got ready to head to the guest room, she gently grabbed his hand. "Stay," she said, without looking at him directly. He froze, unsure he heard her right. "Here. With you?" She nodded, not out of obligation, just because it makes sense now. He dropped the pillow he was holding. And that night, the three of them slept in the same room. No big speeches, no ceremony. Just there. Together. It was also in this new rhythm that James began doing things that seemed small but carried immense weight, like leaving a note on the fridge, "You're stronger than you think, and more beautiful than you know," or preparing a simple dinner with candles on the counter and saying, "Tomorrow marks 3 months since we met the most beautiful smile in the world," or simply reaching for her hand in the middle of the night when the baby cried and whispering, "We're in this together." And in that world of diapers, bottles, dark circles, and beautiful chaos, a new kind of love was born, different from the one she once dreamed of, but maybe exactly the one she needed, a love with no illusions, no grand declarations, but full of presence and full of truth. The day began gray, with a light drizzle tracing patterns down the living room windows. The baby was asleep in his makeshift nest on the rug, and Sophia, wrapped in a blanket, read through a legal report with only half of her focus. The other half was on James, who walked in from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of tea, one already sweetened just the way she liked it, no need to ask. He already knew. "Think you'll be able to finish that report today?" he asked, handing her the cup. "Only if he sleeps for another 2 straight hours, which is about as likely as me winning the lottery. Then maybe buy a ticket." They smiled. The light humor he had developed over the last few weeks was a soft counterpoint to the chaos of their lives, and Sophia leaned on it in the moment she felt close to unraveling. James sat on the floor beside the baby, watched the tiny sleeping face with a focus Sophia had noticed before. But today, there was something different in his gaze. She turned back to the report, pretending not to care, until James spoke again. "Do you know what today is?" She looked up, suspicious. "Monday? The day everything started to change. 3 months since that night, the storm, the country house." She closed the report. "You remember like it was yesterday. I even remember the wine." She watched him for a few seconds. James stood up, walked to the sideboard, and came back with a small box in his hands. But unlike past gestures loaded with expectation, this time he seemed calm. "Before you say anything," he began, kneeling gently on the rug near her. "This isn't a proposal. No dramatic gestures. No promises. Just a symbol." He opened the box. Inside, a ring, simple, no stones, no sparkle, just polished silver, delicate like a whisper. "What does it mean?" Sophia asked, her voice almost a whisper too. "It means that now I choose to stay, every day, not because of a contract, not out of duty, but because I want to." She swallowed hard. "James, I'm not asking you to wear it now or tomorrow. I just wanted you to know the man who handed you that divorce paper doesn't exist anymore." She took the box carefully, ran her fingers over the thin band, and something inside her shifted. It wasn't a rush of emotion. It was a quiet peace beginning to bloom. "It's beautiful," she said, as if she needed time to absorb it. "I wanted it to be simple. Because what we have doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs to be real." She looked at him, and she saw the same man who had stood beside her in the delivery room, who slept in uncomfortable chairs, who held her hand without needing to, who knew when to be silent, who stayed. The baby stirred on the rug, let out a soft murmur, and drifted back to sleep. James muted the television with the remote beside him, another small, almost invisible gesture, but full of meaning. Sophia closed the box and placed it on top of the book on the coffee table. She looked at him for a moment. They just stared at each other. "I still don't know what's going to happen with us," she said. "Neither do I, but I want to find out. With you." She smiled, a quiet but sincere smile. "Are you still sleeping in the guest room? Unless the invitation expired, it's still valid." He stood, gently lifted the baby, as if holding an entire world, and carried him to the crib in the next room. Sophia followed him with her eyes. When he returned, he sat beside her on the couch, effortlessly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Why now?" James leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, thoughtful. "Because I finally understood that love isn't what we feel. It's what we choose to do with what we feel. And I chose not to walk away." She rested her head on his shoulder. Neither of them said another word. The box with the ring stayed closed on the table, but something inside her had already started to open. Love didn't come like lightning. It didn't explode like fireworks. There was no soundtrack, no vows whispered under the moonlight. It came quietly, with timid, silent steps, almost invisible. But by the time Sophia noticed it, it was already there, filling spaces that used to be hers alone. It showed up in a note tucked into her planner, written in James's almost unreadable handwriting. "Good luck at the hearing. But you never needed luck. Just space." Or in an improvised dinner after an exhausting day, undercooked pasta and store-bought sauce, served by candlelight left over from the last blackout. There was no obvious romance, but there was intention, presence, and that was enough. It also showed up when she caught him watching her with their baby in her arms, a long, silent gaze, as if trying to memorize that moment forever. Sophia began noticing the details, the way he folded her blanket more carefully than his own suit, the extra cushion he placed on her desk chair, the way he kept her coffee at just the right temperature, even knowing she'd end up drinking it cold anyway. The nights, once solitary, now had company, not just physically, but emotionally. One night, she woke up to the baby's cry. She got up instinctively, but when she opened the bedroom door, she saw James already in the hallway. The baby in his arms. "Already got him," he whispered, his voice soft, almost melodic. "You heard him before I did. I think I've developed sensitive sleep." She leaned against the doorway, watching them under the dim light. The baby slowly drifted back to sleep on his chest, and in that image, Sophia felt something new: safety. One evening, while driving home from a pediatric appointment, the car stopped at a red light. Outside, an elderly couple crossed the street, hand in hand. James, quiet, watched them closely. "Do you imagine yourself like that someday?" she asked. He took a moment before answering. "Only if it's with you." She turned toward the window, trying to hide her involuntary smile, but her heart skipped to a different rhythm. There was no official proposal, no date set, but little by little, they started acting like something they never truly were before. A couple, a team, a safe place for one another. The following Sunday, while the baby slept in his stroller, they went grocery shopping together. Sophia laughed at how seriously James compared diaper brands, studying prices and materials like he was evaluating stocks on the market. "You treat diapers like high-risk assets, aren't they, in some cases?" It was these small rituals, shopping lists, baby baths, park walks that slowly wove together the fabric of a real love, one without fantasies. And in that quiet rhythm, Sophia started to trust, not out of need, but by choice. She let herself rest while he watched the baby, accepted a goodnight kiss without overthinking it, smiled when he walked in, and sat beside him out of habit. On a chilly night, James found her sitting on the bedroom floor, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the crib. "What is it?" he asked. "Just thinking about how everything's changed." "Scary." She nodded, but also comforting. He sat down next to her, pulled the blanket around them both, and rested his head against hers. Sometimes, what scares us most is exactly what we need. She closed her eyes and stayed there, feeling it. Later that day, she opened the drawer of her desk where she had kept the ring. She took out the small box, looked at it, ran her fingers over the smooth band, and slowly, without rush, she slipped it onto her finger, not as someone saying yes, but as someone saying, "I'm still here." And in that quiet, unassuming gesture was the answer James hadn't asked for but understood immediately. She found him in the kitchen, preparing a bottle for the baby. He saw the ring on her hand, said nothing, just smiled. And that smile was everything, because a love that grows slowly doesn't need to be declared. It only needs to be felt, lived, respected. Time passed the way it does when life finally finds its rhythm. Not fast, not slow, just right. The baby grew up, surrounded by hands that had learned how to care. Even without knowing how at the start, James now changed diapers faster than he managed spreadsheets. Sophia knew every lullaby their son loved and a few she'd made up herself. The house, once cold and overly tidy, now had toys scattered across the floor, baby clothes hanging on chairbacks, and spontaneous laughter echoing from room to room. It was beautiful chaos, real, and above all, shared. One ordinary afternoon, Sophia was rummaging through an old drawer in her office. She was looking for a document, but found something else instead. The folder with the divorce papers, still there, untouched. Blank signatures. The silence they carried was still powerful, but it no longer hurt. She looked at the papers for a while. She didn't rip them up, didn't burn them. She simply closed the folder and placed it back in the drawer. Not as someone who's running from something, but as someone who knows They no longer need protection. She knew now. To love is also to have a choice, and still choose to stay. That evening, while James rocked the baby in the living room, she sat beside him on the couch. They stayed in silence, watching the little one fall asleep, the baby's soft breathing filling the space like background music for everything that didn't need to be said. James glanced at her and asked, almost in a whisper, "Do you still have those papers?" She nodded. "I do." He looked down. "Do you think you'll want to use them one day?" She took a moment to answer. "I kept them, but not as an exit. Just as a reminder of how much we had to unlearn to get here." James took a deep breath and held her hand. "I used to think staying meant being trapped, and now," he looked down at the baby in his arms, "now I understand that staying is a choice, and nothing feels freer than that." That night, before bed, Sophia removed the ring from her finger, not out of regret, but as a ritual. She cleaned it, slipped it back on, and whispered quietly to herself, "Today, I choose to stay too." The days continued with their ups and downs, unexpected fevers, sleepless nights, sore arms, tears for no reason, but also with coffee shared in silence, hugs at strange hours, kisses offered as thank yous, and hands that found each other in the dark. One Sunday, James brought home a framed photo, nothing fancy, just the three of them in the park, the baby smiling in Sophia's arms, James beside them with a peaceful look in his eyes. He handed it to her with a quiet smile. "I thought we needed a real picture. No posing." She hung the photo in the living room, and every time she passed by it, something warm stirred in her chest. Nothing more was needed. And on one of those quiet nights, after a feeding, a diaper change, and a long warm bath, they both sat on the edge of the crib and watched their son sleep. They didn't speak, just laced their fingers together. The silence between them now was light, breathable, chosen, and in that image, fingers intertwined, peaceful eyes, a baby sleeping softly. There was everything that could never be contained in promises or contracts, because true love doesn't shout, it stays. And it doesn't end with happily ever after. It ends with, "We're ace."